If you're renting an apartment right now in the US or almost anywhere in Europe, there's a strong chance you're paying close to a third more than someone paid for that exact same unit back in 2019. That number isn't a rumor or a feeling. It shows up in official housing data across dozens of cities. And here's the part that makes it stranger. This isn't happening in just one expensive city or one broken housing market. Renters in Boston, Berlin, Phoenix, and Madrid are all watching similar numbers climb, even though these places have completely different economies, different governments, and different housing laws. That pattern tells us something important. When the same problem shows up everywhere at once, the cause usually isn't local politics or one bad landlord. By the time this video ends, you'll understand the real mechanism behind rising rent, the one that rarely makes headlines, and why it has almost nothing to do with the villains most people blame first. Let's start with the biggest and most overlooked cause. Construction simply stopped keeping up with demand after 2008. When the housing crash hit, homebuilders across the US pulled back hard, and many small construction firms closed permanently. Building never fully recovered to pre-2008 levels for over a decade, even as population and household formation kept growing every single year. Think of it like a restaurant that lost half its kitchen staff during a bad year and never rehired, even after customers came back in full force. Fewer new apartments and homes were built relative to demand year after year, and that gap compounds over time like unpaid interest. Europe experienced a milder version of the same story, especially in high-demand cities like Amsterdam, Dublin, and Lisbon, where permitting is slow and construction costs kept rising. The math is simple, even if the politics around it aren't. When population grows faster than housing supply, existing units become more valuable, and landlords can charge more because renters have fewer alternatives. For your wallet, this means less negotiating power every time your lease renews, because there simply aren't enough empty apartments competing for your business. The second major cause is specific to the US, and it's the one people talk about most, even though the data tells a more complicated story. Institutional investors buying single-family homes. After the 2008 financial crisis, large investment firms bought foreclosed homes in bulk, especially across southern states like Georgia, Arizona, and Florida, and converted them into rental properties. By 2015, these firms collectively owned somewhere between 170,000 and 300,000 single-family homes, a number that didn't exist at that scale before the crash. This absolutely reshaped rental markets in specific cities like Atlanta and Las Vegas, where investor-owned rentals became a meaningful share of local housing. But here's the twist: most content skips. Nationally, institutional investors today hold roughly 3% of single-family rentals, and firms like Blackstone have actually been selling off homes, not buying more, cutting their holdings by over 90% since 2022. Some early research suggests institutional buyers may have actually increased overall rental supply in certain markets, though this finding comes from a single working paper and isn't yet settled science. Think of it less like one giant corporation cornering the market and more like a few concentrated pockets where the effect was real, surrounded by a much larger national picture where it wasn't the main driver. For your wallet, this means the investor story matters a lot if you live in certain Sunbelt metros, but much less if you're renting in most other places. The third cause crosses the Atlantic and works very differently: rent control policy in parts of Europe. Cities including Berlin, Barcelona, and Stockholm have experimented with strict rent caps meant to protect tenants from sudden price spikes. In the short term, existing tenants in controlled units genuinely benefit, paying well below market rate for years. But economists studying these policies have found a frustrating side effect. Landlords sometimes pull units off the rental market entirely, convert them to short-term rentals, or simply stop maintaining or building new rental housing because the numbers no longer work for them. Picture a shopkeeper told they can only charge a fixed low price for their most popular product forever. Some will keep selling anyway, but others will just stop stocking it. This can shrink the pool of available rentals precisely in the cities where demand is highest, pushing people who don't already have a controlled unit into a smaller, more competitive, and often more expensive uncontrolled segment. This isn't a case of one political side being right and the other wrong. It's a real policy trade-off between protecting current tenants and shrinking future supply. For your wallet, this means if you already have a rent-controlled lease, you may be shielded. But if you're searching for a new place in these cities, you're likely competing for a shrinking slice of available units. Now for the cause that's easy to miss, because it's not really about housing at all. Interest rates. When central banks like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank raise interest rates to fight inflation, borrowing money becomes more expensive for everyone, including landlords and developers. A landlord with a mortgage on an apartment building sees their monthly payment jump, and many pass that cost directly into rent increases to protect their margins. At the same time, developers planning new apartment buildings face higher financing costs, which makes new construction projects less profitable and causes some to get delayed or canceled entirely. This creates a strange squeeze where higher rates simultaneously push current rents up and slow down the new supply that would eventually bring rents back down. It's similar to a small business owner whose loan payment doubles overnight. The first move is almost always to raise prices to cover the gap. Both the U.S. Federal Reserve's rate hikes in 2022 and 2023 and the European Central Bank's parallel increases triggered exactly this pattern across their respective housing markets. For your wallet, this means rent increases you're feeling. Right now may be partly an indirect echo of inflation-fighting policy from a few years ago, not something your specific landlord invented. Finally, here's the cause that's the most counterintuitive, and honestly, the most important. Wage growth has structurally lagged rent growth for roughly 2 decades, and this gap didn't happen by accident of one bad year. In the US, rents climbed about 30% between 2001 and 2024, while renter household wages, adjusted for inflation, grew only around 9% over that same period. That's not a temporary inflation spike. That's 2 decades of a widening gap between what people earn and what shelter costs. In Europe, rents rose nearly 29% between 2010 and 2025, while wage growth in many countries barely kept pace with general inflation, let alone housing specifically. Imagine a treadmill that speeds up every year while your own pace barely changes. Eventually, the gap between the machine's speed and your speed becomes the whole story. This wage-rent gap is the quiet force sitting underneath every other cause we just covered, because even modest rent increases hit harder when your paycheck isn't growing to match them. For your wallet, this means the rent number on your lease might be rising at a normal-seeming rate, but it's landing on an income that simply hasn't kept pace for a very long time. So is this temporary or structural? Based on the data, it's mostly structural, not a short-term blip you can wait out. The construction shortfall took over a decade to build up and will likely take years to unwind. Interest rates move in cycles, but rarely return to ultra-low pre-2008 levels quickly, and the wage-rent gap has been widening for 2 full decades without reversing. What can you actually do about it? Realistically, options are limited but not zero. negotiating lease renewals with concrete comparable rent data, considering slightly smaller metro areas where construction has kept better pace with demand, and staying informed about local zoning or housing policy changes that affect supply in your specific city. This isn't a problem any single renter can fix alone, and it's honest to say that up front, rather than pretending there's a simple hack. Here's the takeaway worth remembering. Rent is expensive almost everywhere right now because of a slow-moving supply shortage and a 2-decade wage gap, not because of one villain you can easily blame. So here's a real question for the comments. Do you think your local housing market is more shaped by supply shortages, investor activity, or policy decisions like rent control? If you want more honest, nonpartisan breakdowns of the economic forces actually shaping your everyday costs, subscribe to World Stages, because we dig into the real mechanisms, not the easy headlines.